Linked by sand and sea, this ancient ground holds the game's very history within its sweeping pastures and shrouded hills. And for over a century, the world's best have tested themselves over this land, investing in and continuing the grandest tradition in golf. Join us as we celebrate 100 years of the British Open, presented by Papa John's. Hello, I'm Jim McKay, welcoming you to the historic Old Course at St Andrews, Scotland. We could not be in a more appropriate setting to begin a new century of this oldest of championships, or to observe a century past. And so over the next hour, we commemorate the last 100 years of the British Open, which has produced a rich and glorious legacy of unforgettable drama, joy, heartbreak, and triumph. Golf at the turn of the century was essentially a British affair, and the men who dominated British golf, and thereby the world, were known as the Great Triumvirate. These legendary pioneers of the modern game, Englishman Harry Vardon, the first touring golf professional, James Braid, Scottish-born and youngest of the three, and the English professional John Henry Taylor made the Open Championship virtually their own. Taylor's breakthrough win in 1894 was the first for an Englishman and came the first time the Open was held outside of Scotland at Sandwich, England, sparking wider interest in the event while elevating the status of professionals. And while Taylor won again the following year, the legendary Harry Vardon would take 3 of the next 4 championships as well as the 1900 U.S. Open. His worldwide success popularized the overlapping grip he used. The Vardon grip would become a fundamental of the game and of his innovative, upright, modern golf swing. Rival and touring partner J.H. Taylor won the 1900 British Open by 8 strokes over Vardon. And by the time James Braid won his first Open title in 1901, Vardon and Taylor already had 3 apiece. But the steady Braid would start his own run of dominance, beginning in 1905 at St Andrews.
In the 1905 Open, James Braid was leading by about 6 shots after some bad weather on the first day. And in fact, he put it into the railway line on the 15th and again on the 16th. He got stuck against a sleeper. He moved it about 4 inches. He then thinned it through the green, and then he played a miraculous chip back to about a foot and still managed to win by 5 shots.
Braid went on to become the first of the great 3 to win 5 British Opens, his last in 1910. In 1902, Sandy Hurd on the right was one of the few to break the Triumvirate's lock on the claret jug. Using a new rubber cord ball, he literally changed the way the game would be played. In 1907, Arnaud Massy became the first overseas winner and is still the only Frenchman to have won a major golf championship. English pro Edward Ted Ray took his only Open title in 1912. Ray was considered one of the finest players in the world, especially as Vardon suffered from exhaustive travel and tuberculosis. The two popularized the game with their dominance, but Ray and Vardon's stunning upset loss to the American amateur Francis Ouimet in the 1913 U.S. Open thrust the popularity of the game to new heights. But the Triumvirate's contributions to the game and their Open record are remarkable for both their breadth and their sustained excellence. From 1894 to 1914, these 3 won 16 British Opens and finished second 15 times. Fittingly, this era of unequal dominance ended at the site of the very first Open, when over half a century later, Harry Vardon won his record 6th Open title at Prestwick in 1914. It was Vardon's last major title, as exhausting travel, failing health, and World War I ended the dominance of the Triumvirate's greatest member. Although play did not begin after World War I until 1920, the championship had continued to evolve. In 1919, to manage the growth the Open had enjoyed, the host clubs asked the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St Andrews to accept the management of the championship and the custody of the cup. The R&A's acceptance of this responsibility validated their role as a world governing body and grew in direct proportion to the Open's popularity. When play resumed in 1920, Englishman George Duncan overcame an opening pair of 80s to win by 2. His win was the last in an era of English dominance, which gave way to one that was distinctly American. 1921 champion Jock Hutchinson was a symbol of this transition. The St. Andrews born and trained golf professional was a naturalized American when he returned to golf's birthplace to claim its greatest pride. From 1922 to 1933, all but 2 Open champions were American-born. The first was Walter Hagen. Considered America's first true golf professional, Hagen seemed to slip as comfortably into a claret jug as into his tailor-made clothes. The Haig looked like a gentleman, lived like a millionaire, and swung from his heels.
He broke a lot of the barriers that stood between the professional and the affluent golfers, the amateur golfers, by getting the professional into the clubhouse is one of the major factors that Walter Hagen did. And his flamboyant style was a great contribution to the game.
Hagen already had 2 U.S. Opens and a PGA championship to go with his first British Open title when he led the American charge. And in 1923, it was supposed to be little Gene Sarazen's turn, but the reigning U.S. Open champ made headlines not by winning, but by failing even to qualify. Britain's Arthur Havers took advantage with a one-shot win over the defending champion Hagen. Despite Havers' victory, the next 10 champions would come from America. Hagen would win again in 1924, 28, and 29. And during one trophy presentation, the Haig kept the Prince of Wales waiting so he could have a drink first. And while the Prince was infuriated, it seemed most of the British were charmed with both the style and wit of the 4-time champion.
Out of the course, but I couldn't tell them very much about several of the holes. I didn't see them.
American dominance continued with long Jim Barnes' win in 1925, the 4th and final major of a brilliant career. And in 1926, the great amateur Bobby Jones started a love affair with the homeland of golf that almost ended before it began.
When Bobby Jones came to St. Andrews, he hated it. Couldn't play the course because he was playing these high pitches, and of course the greens weren't watered in these days, and the ball would just bounce on and on and on and on. And it wasn't until he learned to play the pitch and putt that he managed to master the old course, and he loved it after that. And of course, anybody who loves St. Andrews is loved by St. Andrews.
Jones's growing affection for St. Andrews was reflected in his second Open win in 1927. His score of 285 over the old course beat both the field and the Open scoring record by 6 shots. Jones returned to his beloved St. Andrews in 1930 and won the British Amateur, beginning golf's most historic march. When he captured his 3rd British Open title soon after, Jones returned home to 2 ticker tape parades with half of his legendary Grand Slam complete. The esteem with which the British held the great amateur was recognized when St. Andrews bestowed its greatest honor upon Jones, the freedom of the city.
I could take out of my life everything except my experiences at St. Andrews, and I still have a rich, full life.
Thank you. Following Jones' death in 1972, St. Andrews renamed the 10th hole in his honor. In 1931, Tommy Armour, another Scottish-born American, overcame both putting problems, he was the first to call the yips, and the notorious Carnoustie golf links to win his 3rd and last major title. The next year, Gene Sarazen's determination was finally rewarded. After failing to qualify 9 years earlier, Sarazen took the 1932 Open, using both the caddy, who helped his friend Hagen win 4 Open titles, and a new club he had just perfected, the Sand Wedge, to win by 5 shots and lower the Open scoring record to 283.
I only hope that I will be as worthy champion as these names are. Next year I'll be back here to do my best.
A few weeks later, Sarazen became just the 2nd man to win both Opens in the same year. Americans continued their hold on the jug as Craig Wood lost to Denny Shute in an All-American 36-hole playoff in 1933. finally, in 1934, England's regal Henry Cotton ended the American run with his win at Sandwich.
I don't mind the Americans winning the Cup, but I do feel now that our golf is put back at the top again, and that's the thing that really pleases me more than anything else.
Cotton then walked to an apartment across the street to lay the trophy in the lap of his ailing idol, Harry Vardon. 3 years later, and against a field that included a victorious U.S. Ryder Cup team, Cotton soon proved himself to be the best British golfer of his day. His final round 71 over rain and windswept Carnoustie is still considered one of the Open's greatest rounds ever. And Welshman Dick Burton won the last Open before World War II would halt play for 7 years. The surging popularity the Open had enjoyed suffered a significant setback when play resumed after World War II. American star Sam Snead's trip to St. Andrews in 1946 summed up the championship's tarnished reputation.
Going over from Edinburgh when we arrived on the train, we came by this golf course, and I said to the Scotchman next to me, I said, gee, I said, what disbanded golf course is that? I said, the fences look like it's rode down, and the fairway don't look like it's ever been cut, and the traps, boy, I bet it's never seen a rake. He jumped up high. Hey, you know that St. Andrews? I said, huh? And he said, yes. But I learned to love the course. I think it's one of the greatest courses I played over there.
The long-hitting Snead was the first to overpower the old course, routinely driving several of the par fours on his way to a 4-shot win. But when Snead departed, a period of American non-participation arrived. The allure of a burgeoning and lucrative pro tour stateside, along with a long and difficult trip over there, discouraged most from competing, with one notable exception. The 1953 Masters champion and the 1953 U.S. Open champion responded to the urgings of Armour and Hagen and decided to challenge the world's best. To prepare his game, Ben Hogan went over 2 weeks early, endearing himself to the British fans with his dedication and demeanor. The icy champion was embraced like few Americans before him, drawing huge galleries, which even included one of the more famous members from his club back in California. In conquering a course he called a monster, with steadily improving scores of 73, 71, 70, and 68 to win by 4, the Hawks' legend and career Grand Slam were complete. And like Hagen before him, Hogan's trophy presentation was delayed as he understandably gathered himself with a shot of scotch after his win.
I'm a golfer and have been since I was 12 years old, and tournament golf is my life. And I'm quite sure that I'm going to keep playing, and I'm certainly going to play in the Open again.
Hogan returned to a hero's welcome, but never did return to the Open, winning his last major title on his only try. The American void opened the door for the rest of the golfing world. Fred Daly became the first Irishman to win the Open in 1947 and came up 1 shot short in his title defense. 41-year-old Henry Cotton won at Muirfield in 1948. The Maestro became Britain's first 3-time Open champion since the men of the Triumvirate, nearly half a century earlier. And the following year began a stretch of domination not seen since Braid, Vardon, and Taylor. 2 men, Australian Peter Thomson and South African Bobby Locke, would split 8 of the next 10 Open championships. Locke began the streak in 1949, winning a 36-hole playoff by 12 shots at Royal St. George's. At Troon the following year, Locke successfully defended his title while lowering the Open scoring record by 4 shots to 279. His third title came in 1952 by 1 over Peter Thomson, foreshadowing his rival's emergence. Only Britain's Max Faulkner, who won the only Open ever contested in Ireland at Royal Portrush in 1951, and Hogan in 53, would interrupt the stranglehold Locke and Thomson had on the claret jug. Since the Open expanded to a 72-hole tournament in 1892, no man had won 3 in a row until Thomson started such a run in 1954.
I'm very happy, as you can see. And I know my wife is very happy also, wherever she is. I don't know where she is.
Well, Thompson did find his wife, and television found the Open for the first time in 1955 to see Thompson defend his title and lower Bobby Jones' course record at St. Andrews by 4 shots. And he took his third in a row in 1956 to equal Locke's total. His attempt to become the only man to win 4 in a row ended with a runner-up finish to, who else? Bobby Locke, who won his 4th and last championship in 1957. Also the year in which live television covered the closing stages of the event, a significant development and an important foundation for future growth. Thompson did get his 4th Open title the following year, winning a 36-hole playoff at Royal Lytham, all by the tender age of 28. The final Open of the decade, dominated by Thompson and Locke, was won by a new face at Muirfield when another South African, 23-year-old Gary Player, won the first of his 3 Open championships. And while an international flavor had been restored to the championship, a combination of circumstances were about to reinvigorate the Open like never before. As the British Open turned 100 years old back in 1960, the convergence of the charismatic Arnold Palmer with television proved as powerful here as it had in the United States. Television embraced Palmer at the peak of his powers, and America's new sporting idol single-handedly restored stature to the world's oldest and greatest championship, well, simply by deeming it necessary to endure the trip in quest of the claret jug. Arnold Palmer strode into his first British Open, riding the momentum of 2 stunning come-from-behind wins. First in the 1960 Masters, when he birdied the last 2 holes to win by 1. And 2 months later at the U.S. Open, when he charged from 7 down on the final round to win. The lure of golfing immortality and the Grand Slam compelled Palmer to compete in the British Open.
I went because I felt that if you didn't win a British Open, you really could not consider yourself a top professional golfer. I think that was something that you had to include in your repertoire.
At a time when even the defending Open champion was required to qualify, Palmer overcame his lack of experience on the links, survived qualifying, and managed to put himself in a position to win. At a time when the final 36 holes were played on Friday, Palmer put on a characteristic charge in his morning round. But his momentum was broken by unprecedented rain and flooding. For the first time in Open history, the tournament would finish on a Saturday. Palmer's closing birdie was not enough to overtake the eventual champion, Australia's Kel Nagle. But Palmer's loss would prove to be the Open's gain, as larger weekend TV audiences were able to watch Palmer's heroics. The following year at Birkdale, Palmer would return, and so would his massive galleries and TV audiences. And this time, the king would leave with his crown. Playing in the final group with defending champion Nagle, Palmer pushed a drive on the 15th into the bushes. Leading by 2 with 4 to play, Palmer uncharacteristically ignored the advice of his faithful caddy Tip Anderson and decided to go for the green.
I used all the strength that I had in me to hit a 6-iron out, and even then I wasn't sure how it was going to come out, simply because the rough was so thick. Probably one of the greatest shots in that condition that I have ever played.
The result became the stuff of legend and secured Palmer's one-shot win for his first Open championship. A moment forever memorialized on Birkdale's historic grounds. Palmer returned to defend his title and continued to impress everyone who watched.
Well, my first memory of the British Open is watching Arnold Palmer at Troon in 1962. And of course, I was a great Arnold Palmer fan. He was my idol. You know, Arnold Palmer at that time really brought the Americans back into the British Open scene. Prior to 1961, American golfers stopped going over because of the expense and because there was very little prize money. But Arnold really put it back on the map, and we owe a great debt to Arnold for that.
Palmer won his second straight Open championship by 6 shots with a new Open record of 276. In 1963, the distinctive swing of lefty Bob Charles carried the New Zealander to the title, still the only left-handed winner of a major. 1964 saw the championship return to St. Andrews as the American Tony Lima beat a 24-year-old Jack Nicklaus, already the holder of 3 major championships, by 5 shots. Lima enhanced his gracious and flamboyant reputation by treating the press tent to champagne to toast his victory. The popular champion, appropriately known as Champagne Tony Lima, died with his wife in a small plane crash 2 years later. In 1965 at Birkdale, Peter Thompson won his 5th Open Championship against a strong field, quieting those who had suggested his previous wins were diluted because of a lack of American participation. Thompson joined the elite company of John Henry Taylor and James Braid as the only 5-time winners of the jug. The following year, Muirfield was the host for history as the inevitable happened. 26-year-old Jack Nicklaus, now the holder of 5 major titles, completed his career Grand Slam, becoming just the 4th man and the youngest to do so with an emotional one-shot victory.
The British Open's always been something a little special to me, and I never thought I'd get the opportunity to stand up here. You mind if I enjoy it for a minute, if I don't say anything?
Nicklaus would finish second by 2 shots in each of the next 2 championships. First to the popular Argentinian globetrotter Roberto De Vicenzo in 1967.
Want to win this tournament so hard, and I have to be careful, see?
You've been trying for a lot of years, haven't you?
Yeah. I'll be here about 20 years ago. This will be my first time. I lose my hand in England. Look at that.
In 1968, the Open returned to feared Carnoustie, where Nicklaus finished second again, this time to his rival Gary Player. Player, who had completed his own career Grand Slam just before Jack with his win in the 1965 U.S. Open, won his 2nd British Open title while taming a typically monstrous Carnoustie. At the close of the decade, a truck driver's son, Britain's Tony Jacklin, finally reclaimed some pride for the home country, becoming the first British champion since Max Faulkner in 1951, bringing to an end the longest span ever between British champions. But it would be another 16 years before another homegrown champ would prevail, as the Open was about to enter an era of American domination not seen since the Roaring '20s. It has been said that American golfers do not grasp the subtleties of links-style golf. However, 12 American champions over the next 14 years would seem to indicate otherwise. Appropriately, it would be Jack Nicklaus at St. Andrews in 1970 who would start this era of American dominance. Nicklaus found himself 1 down to countryman Doug Sanders at the 72nd hole. Sanders, who was a runner-up to Nicklaus in '66, now had an agonizing 2-foot putt for par and the win. But instead, Sanders would be doomed to face Jack in an 18-hole playoff the next day, which would end in dramatic fashion.
They came to the last hole, and Jack had to make something happen. He took off one of his sweaters to let everybody know that he was really going to go after this tee shot. And he drove the 18th hole, par 4, drove to the back of the green, and got it down in 2 and still beat Sanders by 1. But that moment on the tee, with Jack taking off the sweater, like it was like a fighter coming out of his robe or something, a very electric moment.
Jack's 3rd Open win in 1978 continued an Open decade in which Jack never finished out of the top 5. Appropriately, his final Open title also came at the Old Course.
St. Andrews is one of my favorite places in the game of golf. I think it's amazing to me every time we go back there that golf course has withstood the test of time and the golfers of centuries and still is a test today. I love playing St. Andrews.
Jack's contemporary nemesis also put his mark on the Open as Lee Trevino took consecutive titles in 1971 and 72. The Merry Mex smiled, laughed, and slashed his way through 2 one-stroke victories, getting out of, into, and out of trouble dramatically to become the first back-to-back champion since Arnold Palmer a decade earlier. But the American most identified with this championship and this era at the time was a little-known and less regarded professional named Tom Watson. In 1975 at Carnoustie, in his first Open ever, Watson prevailed in a playoff to stun the golfing world. After missing the cut in his title defense, Watson returned with a vengeance to battle the world's greatest golfer in what would become the game's greatest duel. 1977, Turnberry. Watson opened with a 68, so did Nicklaus. Nicklaus followed with a 70, so did Watson. Paired together on Saturday, they each shot 65. Now they stood on the 9th tee of the final day, all square. But Watson's errant tee shot would leave him this putt for a par. Nicklaus was also faced with a putt to save his par. And when it dropped, the Bear had a one-shot lead, which is how they stood on the tee at the par 3 15. No. With the Bear safely on, Watson stood some 60 feet from the cup. This unlikely birdie pulled Watson into a tie with Jack, who 2 holes later had this putt to stay even with Watson. Now, Watson had his first lead of the entire weekend. 1 up, 1 to play. After an iron off the tee, Watson approached the 72nd hole. And with Nicklaus's tee shot in deep rough, it seemed Watson had all but won. But Watson didn't forget that he was still playing Jack Nicklaus.
Shot.
As the tension and drama flowed between both competitor and spectator alike, the 2 champions marched to the final green to produce a fitting climax to their dripping battle. Nicklaus's incredible birdie, a shot that only he could seem to produce, made Watson's putt for the win now more than a mere formality.
When I made the winning putt at Turnberry, a joy went through my body that I'd never really experienced before. And I went over to shake Jack's hand, and I'll never forget the words that Jack said. He said, "Tom, I gave you my best shot, but it wasn't good enough."
Watson's 65-65 finish set an open record, and with 3 more titles over the next 6 years, Watson joined the elite group of Braid, Taylor, and Thompson as the only men with 5 Claret Jugs apiece. The seemingly endless parade of American champions of this era included Tom Weisskopf taking his only major in 1973 and Johnny Miller blitzing the field by 6 in 1976. And Bill Rogers in 1981, they all held the cup. The only intruders on what seemed to be an American playground were the ageless Gary Player, who in 1974 became the only player of the century to win the Open in 3 different decades. And the youngest winner of the century, 22-year-old Seve Ballesteros, who scrambled his way to the Claret Jug in 1979. The Spaniard's emergence foreshadowed a tournament that would soon be reclaimed by a new generation of supremely talented international players. As dominant as the Americans were throughout the 70s and early 80s, the rest of the world would restore parity in the mid-1980s, when players from 4 continents would lay claim to the Claret Jug. The international invasion began at St. Andrews in 1984. The 79 champion Seve Ballesteros came to the final hole tied with defending champion Tom Watson. his celebrated birdie on the 72nd hole turned back Watson's bid for 3 in a row. Seve's scrambling magic continued in 1988 when he won for the second time at Royal Lytham for his 3rd Open title overall. A proud son of Scotland, Sandy Lyle, restored the pride of an entire nation with his win in 1985, the first homegrown champion since Jacqueline 16 years earlier. Turnberry was the site in 1986 for a measure of redemption for star-crossed Greg Norman. Norman led every major that year after 54 holes, but only the British after 72. Norman added his only other major win in 1993 when he blitzed the field in the Open with a 66 in the first round and a 64 in the last and a 267 total, the lowest in Open history. The runner-up to Norman in 93 was rival and 3-time Open champion Nick Faldo, who earned his first title in 1987 by grinding out 18 pars on the final day to win. St. Andrews in 1990 offered little resistance to Faldo. The world's best player set an old course record of 270 to win by 5. And in 1992, the normally steady Faldo battled a streaky putter and his own emotions as he tried to regain what had been a 4-shot lead on Sunday.
It really was my Open to lose, and I couldn't finish it off. I was playing well enough, but just couldn't finish it off. And then I said, well, you better play the best 4 holes of your life now, because now you've got to get it back. And I did. I got a good up and down on 16. Then 17 was the best driving 4 I've ever hit. I mean, the best drive I've still ever hit, I think, under the pressure of my life.
His clutch shots on 17 led to a birdie for a 1-shot lead with 1 to play.
And then to walk to the 18th knowing you need a 4 for an Open is an unbelievable feeling in your stomach. I mean, you just, you know, it's just going inside. And as we remember, I was emotionally spent. To have an Open there that, you know, you should win, and you nearly lost it, and you got it back again was, you know, just blew me away for a while.
Mark Calcavecchia was an unlikely American bright spot in the midst of this international run. In 1989, this miraculous eagle pitch propelled him into the first 4-hole playoff in Open history, which he would win. An even more unlikely champion was Australia's Ian Baker Finch in 1991 at Birkdale. His closing rounds of 66-64 tied an Open record and preserved a 2-shot win. The Open's only winner from Zimbabwe, Nick Price, etched his name on the trophy in 1994. This dramatic eagle on the 71st hole pulled Price into a tie with Jesper Parnevik. Hearing the roar behind him, but ignoring the scoreboard ahead, Parnevik thought he needed a birdie at the last to tie, but made a bogey instead, allowing Price to tap in for a 1-stroke victory. The scale of Parnevik's glaring error in judgment would be reduced just 5 years later by the most unbelievable finish in Open Championship history. In 1995, St. Andrews was the setting for a king's farewell to the Open, as well as for an American re-emergence on golf's world stage, one led by an irresistible force. John Daly overpowered St. Andrews, but only led Italy's Costantino Rocca by 1 as Rocca approached the 72nd hole. A shot worthy of a double-digit handicapper apparently gave Daly the 2nd major title of his career. But Rocca followed one of the worst shots in golf history with one of the greatest. The The roller coaster ride for Roca and Daly would end in a 4-hole playoff that Daly would win by 4 shots to take the claret jug. In 1996 at Royal Lytham, Tom Lehman was the next American to lay claim to the trophy. And the following year, Texan Justin Leonard set an open record by coming from 5 shots down on the final day to win. His closing 65 was as much a product of shot making as of experience, and perhaps confidence most of all.
I definitely thought it was possible because playing in majors and seeing the things that can happen to players with that kind of pressure, I definitely knew it was possible.
Leonard set the record with his comeback in 1997 and ironically would witness firsthand the breaking of his record 2 years later. But in 1998, it was 41-year-old Mark O'Meara, the reigning Masters champion, withstood Tiger Woods' final round 66. Endured the hopes of a nation for their beloved amateur Justin Rose. And outlasted expatriate Brian Watts, who made an impossible par save at the last to force an appreciative O'Meara into a playoff. Go. O'Meara prevailed, and the 41-year-old became the oldest man ever to take 2 majors in a single season. The final Open of the century began with a whimper and ended with a roar. And the players provided plenty of both, with Carnoustie playing to a record length of over 7,300 yards, knee-high rough, and typical, meaning bad seaside links weather, scores ballooned as egos deflated. The going was rough for all, it seemed, save one unflappable Frenchman with a magic wand. Jean Van de Velde tamed the unyielding course for the first 3 rounds with an uncanny touch on the greens. The passionate Frenchman forged a 5-shot lead over, among others, Justin Leonard, heading into the final round. The Texan hoped to repeat his record comeback from 2 years earlier, but a bogey at the last seemingly dashed his chances, putting him at +6 for the championship. Local hero Paul Lawrie stood at that same +6, having finished his tournament low round of 67 more than 2 hours earlier. And now, both Lawrie and Leonard waited for the inevitable, as Van de Velde played the final hole with a 3-shot lead. But disaster seemed to court Van de Velde with every shot. And every lucky break seemingly discarded with his next shot. Until Van de Velde finally found the trouble he seemed so desperately to be seeking. Needing only a 6 on the par 4 for victory, Van de Velde's 3rd found the Barry Burn and created one of the game's most surreal and enduring images. The most famous triple bogey in the Open's history allowed Lawrie to come back from 10 shots down, win an improbable playoff, and complete Major Golf's greatest final day comeback, igniting a gallery which hadn't seen a Scot win in Scotland since 1931. But the stirring tournament will always be known as the one the Frenchman lost, and Jean Van de Velde, 1 year later, amazingly has few regrets.
Sure, I want to be good and I want to win, but at the end of the day, you know, that's it's only a game. I mean, it's you do your best and you have to take what it gives you and takes what it takes away from you. Hey, no one got hurt here. I was it's just took too many shots on one hole. That's all. Golf is a fantastic game, but that's not all in life.
No, golf is not life, but it's an incredibly appropriate metaphor for its experiences. And while no one knows what the next century will bring, I think we can rest assured that 100 years from now, the champions of tomorrow will traverse these same hallowed fields and brave the same seaside conditions as Varden, Jones, and Nicklaus before them, all in the quest of becoming the Open champion. From the home of golf, I'm Jim McKay.